Hey everybody, it's Joe Trippi, and welcome back to That Trippi Show with Alex Sashlow. And you know what? He's here. He's here.
Actually here.
I hope everyone had a happy Thanksgiving. We both do. Plenty to talk about around the table this year. That got us thinking, today and in future episodes, we're going to be shifting our focus. How do we move forward from all of this as a party, as a country? How do we not make the same mistakes again? And that's what Alex and I are going to tackle. It's not about looking back so much as looking forward and learning from what's happened to build on what needs to be done to stop this and win in the future. We'll have guests come on with their perspectives. We'll, of course, answer all your questions. And yes, if something crazy happens in Trump land, we will, of course, talk about that and what it all means. But let's look forward. Alex, where do you want to get started?
Joe, before we get into the meat of this, I want to read to our listeners a few quick paragraphs from a book that I reread recently. I've been traveling, and I actually read this book on the flight there a couple weeks ago. And the author of this book, I don't necessarily think the author realized what was going to happen almost 20 years in the future, but I think they got a lot more right than they got wrong. And I'm just going to read you two paragraphs. One's from the afterword and one is from the foreword. The first I would say, and Joe, I think you'll pick up which book I'm reading very quickly here. You may have wondered about the phrase, the overthrow of everything, that's part of this book's subtitle. I mean it. You can't understand how radically the internet, social networks, and social and viral media are changing our politics and somehow still believe that your institution, your company, and your country will somehow be immune. Everything is on the verge of big, sweeping change, more change than most of us can imagine, and it's coming at a very rapid pace. My advice, stop denying the inevitable and start adapting now.
Yeah, it's my book. I haven't read that thing in a long time, but yeah, it was 20 years ago.
The other one I thought was good, and then we'll get into it, it's the story of how to engage Americans in a real dialogue, how to reach them where they live, how to stop selling to them and start listening to them, how to make better use of the most revolutionary idea to come along since the first man learned to light a fire. I'm not talking about the internet or computers or telecommunications. I'm talking about democracy. And Joe, I don't know if you can see it, but my copy is like kind of faded. It's kind of funny.
Yeah.
That's, of course, Joe's book. The Revolution Will Not Be Televised, which everyone should read. Most of you on this have already heard it. But Joe, I don't think you were probably envisioning that we'd be doing this, talking about what Trump has done to kind of upend democracy, but thought that was a good place to start.
Well, one of the things I said in the book was, because, I had the more idealistic view of what we could do with that knowledge and what was happening. But I also said pretty clearly in the book many times that the technology does not know the ideology or the crank that's using it, and that the bad guys would be out there and take full advantage of it. And if we didn't, we would regret it, which kind of does get to where we are, I think, because I've said many times that the Democratic Party, obviously that book was written right after the Dean campaign, sort of my thinking on where things were going. I don't know if anybody in my party read it, but for the most part, the only thing they got from the Dean campaign is you can raise a lot of money on emails, which is something that does, help in campaigns, but wasn't the most important thing. A lot of it is some of the things you just read that we completely missed, and that the Trump campaign, that the far right went to school on immediately. The power of that, of directly connecting and building the networks that are now overwhelming us.
You said something in the book that I thought was pretty good. There's like 600,000 people who ended up being kind of Deniacs at the end. And the thing that not only got them, it wasn't just that they donated, $37 at a time, whatever it ended up being. I know you set a lot of records, but there was a feeling of investment in a movement that somehow I think we really need to figure out how to bring back. I think if you look at what, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's the difference of how we got here was the two things that we didn't it was like, great, we can raise money. They learned, no, you can really build networks that are absolutely deep connection to your supporters and amplify your message, et cetera. That's one. But the other thing that I think is real important is that we continue, and I'm talking about the Democratic Party in particular, but even a lot of the the donors and activists, we see it as an election every 2 years. And we focus on the election, on this House race or that Senate race. They are a movement. It is a movement to gain control, gain power, and it with a very long view. And they continually build the networks, and they continually build the apparatus, build the think tanks, build the legal arguments, everything to win that power and to impose their beliefs on the rest of us. That's how they view it. You just put your finger on it, Alex. We need to view ourselves as a movement, a long over the horizon movement. And then what's that movement about? Well, it should be a pro-democracy movement. If you view it that way, the same thing. What are the policies? What are the things that we need to do to grow a pro-democracy movement in this country and to be every day? They are relentless. The Harris campaign has turned off its social media. The Democratic Party is not, like, as an official thing, really reacting online to anything right now. Basically, we and our campaign arms and all that go to sleep for the next year, and then and then ramp up. They don't. They are relentlessly out there messaging right now, building their networks even deeper and even larger into new groups, like they did with AI enthusiasts and crypto enthusiasts this time around. And before you even get to some of the Latinos and some of the things that we were focused on, they were in the World Wrestling Entertainment Network, in the Ultimate Fighting Championship Network. And it's relentless. It's constant. It's every day. And they continue to build it. And it's the same thing of, they're in every school board race. Because why? They want to take over how the schools are run, right? We view that as an election next year. We may not even recruit candidates for school board races in places because we are so focused on federal. And so I just think that's one of the first lessons of all of it. I mean, there's a couple. One, and we've talked about it on the podcast before, we've got to start, they own, we rent. We got to start owning our own networks, creating our own social networks and media outlets that are about not propaganda. They don't even have to be partisan, but they have to be about building trust in each other, civility, all the things that make democracy possible. Because if the other social networks, if X is doing algorithms that make us divided and tear us apart, and they're fueled by a party that's spouting lies and has networks that will amplify those lies, you can't, not addressing it. And journalism is not, if you think journalism is going to do this, think again. I mean, so it's a relentless movement that is pro-democracy, and a party that is out there every day, constantly making its policies and knocking down the lies and taking them on. You can't let a transgender attack go without an answer, and make believe that it's not, that they're not using that in networks where they're reaching Latinos or Black men or young men who are at the World Wrestling Entertainment or Ultimate Fighting Championship or on their Xbox playing Tour of Duty, and they're being inundated with those messages, and we're not even there. So I just think it's those, there are, one, we have to be a relentless movement. And, I'd much rather be a relentless movement on behalf of democracy than a relentless movement on tearing things down, dividing us, and trying to build an autocratic, future, right? An authoritarian future. So we have to. We think we're fighting another campaign. No, we have to be a movement. The party institutions have to modernize to look at it that way. We have to be everywhere in every community. And I mean, to give you an example of this, I don't know, but when was the last time for candidate for president went to a rodeo, right? I mean, we don't, that's what I'm saying. We need to start thinking like that. We need to be everywhere and talk to everyone, and it has to be relentless. And anyway, so I'll get off that horse, but that's the first lesson, I think, of what we need to do moving forward.
But we can't get off that horse. One of the things that I know we were talking about pre-show got us talking about this. There was a Mark Elias who obviously fought and beat Trump a whole bunch in court last time and has been doing yeoman's work in the pro-democracy movement in courts pretty consistently since. He wrote a really good piece, and we'll try to link to it sooner or later. But he said he really got to the difference between resistance versus opposition. And this gets to kind of what you were saying, Joe. He puts a finer point on it. But he says, after 2016, a movement that would be known as the resistance quickly emerged to protest and confront Donald Trump and his administration. The hope was that if Trump could be held back, resisted for 4 years, politics would go back to normal. A Democrat would retake the White House, and Trump would be viewed as an unfortunate aberration. Goes on more, but the whole idea was the resistance. He points out the resistance did a couple important things, helped protect the ACA, helped some policies at the state level, local level. But what was happening on the other side was the quote unquote opposition, or that MAGA movement, was not going away. He says Republicans used the time, he's talking about the Biden administration, fruitfully. They built new ideological organizations, new campaign structures, new media outlets, and new leaders. Even as they suffered midterm losses, they were undeterred from their mission of fleshing out what a second Trump term would look like. MAGA was not focused specifically on resisting Biden. It had a bolder agenda. It wanted to build an opposing ideological and political movement to win elections and govern over the long term. And I think that, to me, if we're thinking about, we got to look back a little bit to inform our strategy. But if we're looking at the fundamental difference between opposition and resistance, if we're looking at what MAGA got right, it's not just MAGA. It's basically the conservative movement has been relentless for 40 plus years. And we've had guests talk about it. Yeah. We've talked about the legal structures that they've put in place, but we need to stop thinking about this in terms of build up, quick election, and then go super dark, which is what's been happening for the last 3 weeks. And I don't blame people to an extent, but at the same time, we got to start building, man.
Well, also, it's hard to build when you spend $2 billion, $4 billion, whatever on TV ads. In other words, like if only 100 million of that, we wouldn't have lost the election or any worse, or wanted, because we only spent 3.9 billion instead of 4. But 100 million actually invested in building networks, or doing, it's like they have for 40 years, they built the financiers, they have the billionaires that will buy Fox News, buy X, Elon Musk now, jokingly or not, and I'm not sure that he's not, is talking about buying MSNBC because it's now it could be on the auction block as Comcast sets its cable stuff aside. So they go out and they understand, what they're doing is they buy these local TV stations. As Sinclair Broadcasting's chairman buys the Baltimore Sun, and as the media fragments further and further, they own more and more of the networks. And again, those were all sort of cable and broadcast, but let's look at what's going on with social networks. And the social networks all have algorithms that are more about the most clicks, what's the most controversial thing that gets the most eyeballs, that gets people going at each other. which is all about tearing us apart instead of a democracy where you have to be able to find some commonality. And then you have a party that plays into those algorithms and with their people buying them. And they work in concert to destroy and erode trust in each other, in a lot of the institutions that we count on for our health and other things. And at the same time, there is no movement to resist that. There isn't. That's what I'm saying. We have to view, that's the movement we have to build. I do want to read something that I wrote when I was founding Says Us, and it's not a pitch on Says Us, but I think it gets to what we're talking about, because I sent this around, or I think I posted it on Says. But among all the reasons for the loss and the growing threat to democracy is the right's unanswered creation and ownership of propaganda networks on communication platforms from cable television to social media. The power of what they have built is overwhelming, and the evidence is in the results of this election. Yes, you can change our message, find a different candidate, pour even more money into TV ads and an incredible ground game. But it will be no match against the demonization of that message and candidate by the vast propaganda networks the right now owns and controls. It turns out knocking on doors in October every 2 years cannot undo their relentless attacks and unanswered lies. For those who thought journalism would be a counterweight, think again. Will millions of Americans join and create social networks that build trust and community instead of destroying it? Will donors turn into investors and invest in social networks to counter the algorithmic-driven networks that are destroying our trust in each other and in our democracy? Not a partisan propaganda machine, but a social network of by and for the community. And I don't want to, because the rest turns into it, why you should, but I will read this part. 250 years ago in America, we threw out a petty tyrant king and replaced him with the greatest experiment the world has ever known by asserting that a government of, by, and for the people could long endure. If our democracy is to endure much longer in 2024, the greatest threat is the networks, stupid. And it is their ownership of them and are not going that route, which we need to. Will we build social networks, digital outposts, and citadels that defend democracy? Can we create together social networks that build trust and community instead of tearing them down? This isn't, that's what I mean, this isn't a Democratic Party thing. This is what we all need to do. And the party needs to recognize it's either part of that movement, or is it really just going to be about whatever tactics they think are going to win the next election? Because my view of it is the erosion of trust by these networks that they've built and the size of them. And I'm talking about Breitbart. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And places that we should be. Like we should be on Joe Rogan. We should be talking to people who are at the next UFC fight. I mean, these are things that we should be at least talking to them about what we are about and challenging the lies. Because right now they just live in that UFC network, and we aren't there. So anyway, I'll get off the horse on why people should check out Says Us. But it's not about Says Us. It's about, we need all these things. We do need to think about our message. And the one thing I'll tell you, though, about the message and the candidate, and I've learned this over the long haul, there'll be all kinds of committees and stuff looking into what went wrong and how we need to change our message and, and all that. But it's going to be decided, all that, but for the party is going to be decided in the primaries of 2028. There'll be somebody saying, hey, we need to move further to the left. There'll be somebody saying, no, we got to be in the center. There'll be a candidate probably emerging next week to say, no, I'm going to lead the resistance and do battle night and day with Donald Trump and MAGA. All these different candidates will populate, and one of them will win. And it's that the person that wins will have essentially garnered enough support in the party that will be the direction of the party, and the message of the party will be that's what happened in '92 when Bill Clinton broke all the orthodoxy in the party that had a long list of Northeastern liberals had lost, and we'd lost, three straight presidential campaigns, and different candidates emerged with different visions. And Bill Clinton came along with a lot of policies that came out of the Democratic Leadership Council to move more to be a more pro-business party. And we all agree, disagree, but it worked. We won. And what I'm saying is similar things will happen here. And so I think it's important for everybody who listens to the podcast to think one of the things that you can have the most impact on is thinking about who those candidates are. And as they start to get into this, start lining up with somebody that you actually think is the message and the messenger, because that will have a lot bigger impact than and you can help shape them early on about where you think they need to be on these issues. And I do think the one thing that we need to, the one thing I've learned through all these, because I've been involved in several of them where I was part of the problem we lost. I've been talking about when I was really young, in my 20s, and was, idealistic, not very pragmatic. I learned that, and I think we may have seen this we could all, look at their attacks on transgender people and believe our principles are, we've got to fight that, and et cetera, or the campaign actually ignored it. But my point would be, what I learned is you lose. There's not a damn thing you can do for the people that are vulnerable and under attack. And so I think part of this is to get a little bit humble about how pragmatic, and a little bit pragmatic about what who the right candidate and messenger will be, while at the same time being a resistance. Like those could be two different things. And so what I'm saying is, it's first, we've got to build some networks, own them, that are pro-democracy movements. Two, there will be candidates out there who will be expressing message and putting themselves forward. Each of us can get behind. And by the way, that primary there'll be differences, but then we have to be unified and pragmatic when we have the nominee, whoever that is. And at the same time, there have to be people who will offer real resistance. And by the way, it could be one of them that becomes the nominee. But I'm just saying they could be two different things, and that may be something that we all have to think through as it develops.
So, Joe, I think we have a lot more to get into, but we have plenty of episodes to do that in the future. I think that's a really good place for us to end. Is there anything else you want to plug? Otherwise, let's let everyone get back to their holiday weekend.
Yeah, no, that's the biggest thing here, folks. It is you should all have a great holiday week. Enjoy the rest of it. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving. But this is a time to sort of think, reflect, and I think move on to how we get there, how we move forward. And I do think this, I think raising your voices, telling the party, telling donors, hey, that we need to start owning our own networks, that we need to be a movement, not a every 2-year campaign apparatus. That's the way to do battle. That is what will save democracy, and you can be a very, very important and big part of that. So thanks everyone for listening to that Trippi Show. Says Us is now live. Sign up and free yourself of Elon's doom scrolling at says.us, SEZ.us. This podcast will always be free and part of Resolute Square. Check out the latest at resolutesquare.com/Trippi. Please subscribe to That Trippi Show and leave a review on Apple or wherever you listen. Also, if you're listening to this episode on YouTube, please like and subscribe to get alerts when we post the next episode. You can always send us a question to That Trippi Show at gmail.com or leave us a review on iTunes. We'll see you next week. Thanks all.
Resolute Square.